It was a cold, unforgiving Tuesday in late 1963, just months after the infamous Alcatraz closure. The winds off San Francisco Bay carried the scent of salt and forgotten promises, a fitting backdrop for a decision that would echo for decades. Inside a federal transfer facility, far removed from the legendary Rock, a desperate man saw his chance. Silas Malone, a mid-level enforcer operating in the shadows of Harlem, found himself caught in a vice. A mounting gambling debt, the silent threats against his family, and the ever-present fear of being swallowed by the streets had pushed him to the brink. His loyalty, once pledged to the undisputed kingpin of Harlem, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, was about to snap. Bumpy, a man whose name commanded respect and fear in equal measure, was being moved, his power momentarily diluted by the federal system. Silas, part of Bumpy's trusted inner circle, was supposed to be his eyes and ears on the outside, to grease the right palms, to ensure a smoother transition. But in that moment of Bumpy's vulnerability, Silas saw not a duty, but a golden, albeit treacherous, opportunity. A rival faction, sensing weakness, had offered him a lifeline: disappear, secure a future, and in return provide crucial intelligence on Bumpy's movements, his contacts, and the intricate web of his operations. Silas made his choice. He thought he was playing the long game, betting on Bumpy's incarceration lasting forever, betting on the chaos of the federal transfer covering his tracks completely. He calculated that 20 years behind bars for Bumpy would be enough, more than enough, to pay off any debt, to erase any memory of his betrayal. He was wrong. Some debts, Silas, are never truly paid. The central question that has haunted the whispers of the underworld for decades isn't just if Bumpy found out, but how he orchestrated a retribution so meticulously delayed, so devastatingly precise, that it became a legend in itself. This isn't a story about a quick hit. It's about the invisible threads of loyalty and betrayal stretching across an entire generation, culminating in an impossible outcome for the man who thought he'd outsmarted a ghost. What secret agreement, what unspoken code did Silas violate that made his eventual comeuppance so inevitable, even after years of apparent freedom? And what kind of man holds a grudge for 2 decades, only to deliver a justice far more chilling than death itself? To truly grasp the magnitude of Silas Malone's miscalculation, you first have to understand the man he betrayed. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson wasn't just another gangster from Harlem. He was an institution, a strategist, a philosopher of the streets. While other crime bosses relied on brute force, Bumpy operated with a cold, surgical intellect. He read books, he played chess, and he understood the nuanced dance of power better than any politician. His word was law, his reputation ironclad, and his memory legendary. To betray Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a breach of trust. It was an act of existential defiance against the very fabric of the Harlem underworld he commanded. Silas, on the other hand, was a creature of impulse, a small-time operator dreaming of a bigger score. He saw Bumpy's federal transfer, a routine bureaucratic nightmare for any high-profile inmate, as a window. Alcatraz was closing, a symbolic end to an era. Bumpy was being shuffled through the system, his usual power base fractured, his lines of communication strained. It was a moment of vulnerability, a rare crack in the armor of Harlem's kingpin. Silas, consumed by the pressure of his gambling debts, $250,000, a fortune in the 60s, and the chilling threats against his wife and kids, saw only an escape hatch. He believed the authorities, the rival factions, the sheer passage of time would swallow his treachery whole. He envisioned a new life, a clean slate, far from the concrete canyons of New York City. He was promised a substantial sum, enough to vanish and start over in an unnamed city, a place where his past would be just a whisper. In exchange, he provided detailed intel. Bumpy's transfer schedule, the specific federal agents involved, the names of Bumpy's loyalists still on the outside, even the locations of hidden stashes and contingency plans Bumpy had laid down for his temporary absence. This wasn't just a tip-off. It was a blueprint for dismantling Bumpy's operations. The rival faction used Silas's information to intercept messages, disrupt supply lines, and put pressure on Bumpy's lieutenants, sowing chaos and uncertainty just when Bumpy needed stability the most. Silas watched from a safe distance as the empire he'd helped build began to wobble. He saw it as proof of his cleverness, a testament to his ability to play the game on a higher level than he'd ever managed before. He truly believed he had pulled off the perfect disappearing act, trading a lifetime of servitude for a fresh start. But Bumpy Johnson was not a man who forgot. He was not a man who forgave. His code, forged in the brutal streets of Harlem, was simple: loyalty above all. A betrayal wasn't just a personal slight. It was an attack on the very foundation of his power, a challenge to the order he had meticulously built. And Bumpy, even behind federal bars, had eyes and ears everywhere. The underworld was a sprawling network, a complex organism with an uncanny ability to sniff out deceit, no matter how deep it was buried. Silas's actions, though initially shrouded in the chaos of the transfer, left ripples. A missing piece here, a sudden vulnerability there, a shift in the power dynamic that was just a little too convenient. Bumpy felt the tremors. He knew. The whispers began almost immediately, hushed conversations in dimly lit back rooms, coded messages passed through jailhouse walls. No one could pinpoint exactly how Bumpy knew, but the certainty was absolute. And that, in itself, was part of Bumpy's legend. He possessed an almost supernatural awareness, a sixth sense for treachery. Silas Malone became a ghost, vanishing from New York, leaving behind nothing but the stench of betrayal. He built his new life brick by brick in a distant city, far from the reach of Harlem. He started a legitimate business, raised a family, contributed to his community. He aged, his hair graying, his memories of the old life fading into the background, replaced by the mundane rhythms of suburban America. But the quiet hum of suburban life, the gentle rhythm of a world built on fresh starts and forgotten pasts, often lulls a man into a dangerous sense of security. Silas Malone, for all his carefully constructed peace, had made one fundamental miscalculation. Time, for some, is not a healer of wounds, but merely a patient, sharpening stone for the blade of retribution. The streets of Harlem, the very ground Bumpy Johnson walked, had a memory that stretched further than any federal file, a code that ran deeper than any concrete wall. To truly grasp the seismic tremor Silas had unleashed, one must first understand Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. He wasn't simply a name whispered in back alleys. He was a force of nature, a living legend etched into the very soul of Harlem. Forget the brute force, the mindless violence often glorified in the tabloids. Bumpy Johnson was a different breed entirely. He was a strategic genius, a man whose calm demeanor, mastermind sharper than any razor, a scholar of Machiavelli who moved through the brutal, unforgiving streets with the precision of a chess grandmaster. His dominant trait wasn't just power, but an unyielding code of conduct, a reputation for absolute fairness in his dealings, and an uncompromising, almost chilling intolerance for disloyalty. Bumpy didn't just rule Harlem, he was Harlem. He commanded immense respect, yes, but also a profound, visceral fear from those who understood the quiet depth of his resolve. He grasped that true power wasn't about the number of bodies you dropped, but about influence, about an unblemished reputation, and most crucially, about an unwavering memory. He was the silent architect behind the city's pulse, the man who understood that every action, every slight, every betrayal carried an invisible weight. The story of Silas and Bumpy unfurled in the tumultuous 1960s and 70s, a period of immense social upheaval across America. Cities like Harlem, vibrant hubs of black culture and commerce, were simultaneously fiercely contested battlegrounds. The lucrative numbers rackets, the burgeoning drug trade, the protection schemes that underpinned daily life, all were territories to be fought over, negotiated, and secured. Bumpy operated within a complex, often treacherous ecosystem of corrupt police officials, ambitious politicians, and rival families constantly vying for supremacy. The stakes weren't merely about dollars and cents. They were about maintaining a delicate balance of power, preserving one's reputation, and ensuring that the unwritten yet ironclad laws of the street were upheld. A betrayal of the magnitude committed by Silas Malone, especially during a federal transfer when Bumpy was at his most vulnerable, wasn't just an attack on one man. It was a direct assault on the very fabric of trust that held the entire criminal enterprise together. It was a declaration that the code itself could be broken, that loyalty was a negotiable currency. And in Bumpy's world, that was a sin far graver than murder. Silas, our pivot human, was a man consumed by ambition, yes, but also by a gnawing, ever-present fear of failure. He had a knack for finding vulnerabilities, a talent he honed in the shadows of Bumpy's empire, always looking for the easy out, the shortcut to a comfortable life. His objective was deceptively simple: escape the life he was in, secure a comfortable future for his family, and avoid the crushing consequences of his mounting debts back in the city. He saw his treachery not as a moral failing, but as a strategic maneuver, a calculated risk for a better life. He truly believed he had pulled off the perfect disappearing act, trading a lifetime of servitude for suburban anonymity. But Silas, for all his street smarts, failed to grasp the depth of Bumpy's reach, the terrifying patience of his vengeance, and the unbreakable nature of the code he had violated. He gravely underestimated the man whose trust he had so casually discarded, a mistake that would prove to be his undoing years down the line. He imagined Bumpy, locked away, would simply fade into memory. What he didn't account for was the quiet hum of the underworld, a network that never truly slept, a network that still revered Bumpy Johnson. Years bled into decades. The 1960s became the 1970s, then the 1980s. Bumpy Johnson, the kingpin, was eventually released. The world had changed. Harlem was different, but some things, like the memory of a betrayal, remained immutable. Silas, now graying, his legitimate business thriving in a city far from the East Coast, allowed himself to breathe a little easier. He'd built a small empire, a respectable life. He coached Little League, attended PTA meetings, celebrated Thanksgiving with his family, all the hallmarks of a man who had truly left his past behind. He believed the debt was paid, forgotten, lost in the shifting sands of time. What Silas couldn't see, what no one outside a very select circle understood, was that Bumpy's retirement wasn't a retreat. It was a repositioning. His release from federal custody didn't sever his connections, it merely shifted their focus. Harlem still whispered his name, and those whispers carried across state lines, across the country. Bumpy's eyes and ears weren't just in New York, they were everywhere, patiently gathering dust motes of information, piecing together the mosaic of Silas Malone's new, respectable existence. It started subtly. A slight hiccup in Silas's legitimate business dealings, a seemingly random audit from a state agency that had never shown interest before. Then, a key supplier, one Silas had relied on for years, suddenly faced unexpected regulatory issues, forcing them to sever ties. These were not direct threats, no broken windows or anonymous phone calls. These were pinpricks, inconvenient and costly, but easily dismissed as the ordinary frictions of running a successful enterprise. Silas would grumble, hire a new lawyer, find a new supplier, and push on. He saw them as isolated problems, not as threads in a meticulously woven tapestry of quiet destruction. But Bumpy Johnson understood that the most devastating blows were often the ones delivered not with a fist, but with a pen, a phone call, a carefully placed word. He knew that the true agony wasn't a sudden, violent end, but the slow, agonizing unraveling of everything a man held dear. He wasn't interested in simply ending Silas Malone's life. He was interested in dismantling it, piece by agonizing piece, until Silas understood the true cost of betraying a legend. This wasn't about revenge. It was about upholding a code, about sending a message to anyone who dared to think the past could ever truly be outrun. For Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the federal penitentiary was never an end, merely a calculated pause in a life of strategic command. During his time in custody, the initial tremors of Silas Malone's betrayal began to reach him, not as direct accusations, but as subtle, unsettling whispers carried on the wind of the prison grapevine. Information that should have been secure, movements that should have been private, were surfacing in unexpected places, reaching rival ears, painting a picture of a compromised system. Bumpy, ever the strategist, couldn't act then, not from behind bars, but he filed away every detail, every name, every inconsistency, like entries in a ledger of future debts. This period, often overlooked in the grand narratives of mob history, was Bumpy's crucible. It forged his resolve, hardening his already formidable will and sharpening a mind that had always been a cut above. He understood that immediate, violent retribution, while satisfying to the primitive instinct, would only confirm his weakness, a desperate lashing out. Instead, he cultivated a patience that bordered on the monastic, a quiet, simmering resolve, knowing that true justice, the kind that reshapes the very landscape of the underworld, required time. It required a meticulous, almost artistic destruction. Meanwhile, Silas Malone, years after his treachery, genuinely believed he had successfully vanished into the vast, anonymous tapestry of American life. He had built a new existence, far from the concrete canyons of Harlem, in a city where the sun seemed to shine a little brighter, where the shadows weren't quite so long. He wasn't living in luxury, not yet, but he had a small, thriving enterprise, a legitimate one, he'd tell himself, a respectable family, a veneer of normalcy he meticulously maintained. Every morning he'd wake in his suburban home, drive his modest American sedan to his office, and sign papers that had nothing to do with numbers running or street taxes. He convinced himself that the passage of time, coupled with Bumpy's extended incarceration, had paid off his debt. He thought he was safe, free from the long, unforgiving arm of his past. He thought he had outrun the ghost, but Bumpy Johnson had been watching, waiting, pulling invisible strings from a distance that felt like another lifetime, gathering intelligence with the quiet efficiency of a predator, staking out its prey. The world might have forgotten Silas Malone, but Bumpy Johnson possessed a memory that stretched across decades, across prison walls, across state lines. He knew where Silas lived, where he worked, what he ate for breakfast, the names of his children. He knew the fragile scaffolding of the new life Silas had so carefully constructed. The first subtle signs of Bumpy's return to the board, years after his release, were not violent threats or ominous phone calls. There were no anonymous bricks through windows, no whispered warnings in dark alleys. Bumpy didn't deal in crude intimidation. His methods were far more insidious, designed to unravel a man from the inside out, to make him question his own sanity before he ever suspected the architect of his demise. It started small. A key business deal Silas was pursuing, one that promised to expand his enterprise significantly, would mysteriously fall through at the last minute. The papers would be signed, the handshake firm, the ink barely dry, and then, a day later, a polite but firm withdrawal. No explanation, just a sudden cold shoulder. Then a crucial loan application, one that had been pre-approved, would be inexplicably denied, the bank manager offering vague apologies about unforeseen complications or new internal policies. Silas would scramble, bewildered, unable to pinpoint the exact moment things went south. A new partner, someone Silas had painstakingly cultivated over months, an individual with significant capital and influence, would suddenly, politely, withdraw from their venture. Again, no drama, no shouting, just a quiet, almost apologetic retreat, leaving Silas with a handshake and a gnawing sense of unease. These weren't random occurrences. They weren't bad luck. They were the meticulously placed pieces of Bumpy's game, a silent, unseen hand manipulating the board. Each setback, each closed door, each lost opportunity chipped away at Silas's carefully crafted legitimacy, eroding his confidence, his finances, and his peace of mind. He'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every meeting, searching for the error, the misstep that didn't exist. And then there was the icon. Bumpy Johnson, the Harlem kingpin, was known for many things, but one particular habit stood out to those who truly understood him. He would often carry a single pristine white handkerchief, always freshly pressed, always immaculate. He'd use it to delicately wipe the rim of a glass before taking a sip, or to offer to a nervous associate in a moment of tension, a stark contrast to the brutal, often messy world he inhabited. It represented his meticulous nature, his demand for order and cleanliness even in chaos, a silent declaration of his control. One Tuesday morning, Silas Malone walked into his office. On his desk, nestled atop a stack of invoices, was a single, pristine white handkerchief. It wasn't folded, just casually placed, as if someone had forgotten it. There was no note, no message, just the handkerchief. Silas stared at it, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He picked it up, feeling the crisp linen, the faint scent of starch. He dismissed it as a coincidence. A week later, at his favorite diner, meeting with a potential investor, he excused himself to the restroom. When he returned, there it was, another white handkerchief, folded neatly next to his coffee cup as if left by a phantom diner. His investor hadn't noticed. No one else seemed to. But Silas saw it. He began to see them everywhere, tucked into the front pocket of a newspaper he bought, casually draped over a fence post near his children's school. Once, he found one carefully placed on the passenger seat of his car, after he'd sworn he'd locked the doors. Each appearance was a silent, chilling promise. It was Bumpy's signature. It was the debt collector's calling card. And Silas, for the first time in 2 decades, felt the cold, hard grip of fear, a fear far deeper than any physical threat. He wasn't being warned. He was being marked. The slow, agonizing unraveling of his life had begun, and he finally knew who held the thread. The psychological torment became a relentless current, pulling Silas under. He started seeing Bumpy's ghost in every shadow, hearing whispers of his name in every hushed conversation. His once thriving business, now starved of capital and connections, began to bleed money. Clients, once loyal, found reasons to take their business elsewhere. His phone, once a constant source of opportunity, grew silent. The legitimate life he had painstakingly built, the one he believed would be his sanctuary, was now a prison of his own making, its walls crumbling around him. Silas became a shell of his former self, the confident, ambitious man who had dared to betray Harlem's kingpin was replaced by a hollow-eyed, jumpy figure who saw threats in every glance, betrayal in every handshake. His family noticed the change. His wife, worried, asked what was wrong, but Silas, trapped in a nightmare only he could see, could offer no explanation. How could he tell her that the past, a past she knew nothing about, had finally caught up? How could he explain that a man he thought was buried in a federal prison was now systematically dismantling their entire existence without ever laying a hand on them? One frigid December afternoon, 2 years after the first handkerchief appeared, Silas Malone received a single, unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside, there was no letter, no threat, just a small, faded photograph. It was a picture of a younger Silas, standing next to a younger Bumpy Johnson, laughing, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The photo had been taken decades ago, in Harlem, a lifetime away. On the back, in elegant cursive, a single sentence was written. "Some debts are never paid in full, Silas. They are merely collected with interest." That night, Silas Malone packed a single suitcase. He didn't say goodbye to his wife, didn't kiss his children. He simply left. He vanished into the night, abandoning the legitimate life he had tried so desperately to build, the life Bumpy had so carefully destroyed. He became a ghost once more, but this time he wasn't running from the law. He was running from a debt that could never be settled, a shadow that would forever pursue him. His enterprise collapsed, his family left behind to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by an unseen force. The message reverberated through the underworld. Bumpy Johnson might be old, but his reach was long, his memory unforgiving, and his justice absolute. No one dared to think the past could ever truly be outrun, not when Bumpy Johnson was still breathing. Bumpy Johnson himself, ever the quiet observer, never spoke of Silas Malone again. He didn't need to. The story of Silas's unraveling became a legend whispered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale passed down from one generation of the underworld to the next. It was a chilling testament to the power of a mind that understood the true nature of retribution. It wasn't about bullets or blood. It was about the systematic dismantling of a man's identity, his security, his very soul. It was about proving that loyalty wasn't just a word, but the very foundation upon which empires were built, and betraying it carried a price no amount of time or distance could ever diminish. The streets learned a harsh truth. A debt owed to Bumpy Johnson was never forgotten. It wasn't a matter of if it would be collected, but when and how meticulously. He taught them that true power isn't about how many people you can hurt, but how many you can break without ever raising your voice. It's about the silent, relentless pressure that makes a man choose exile over existence. It's about the long game, played with patience, precision, and an unshakable belief that some scores can only be settled by dismantling everything a man holds dear. In the end, Silas Malone learned that the only thing more terrifying than Bumpy Johnson's wrath was his patience. If this story of calculated retribution and the long memory of the streets gripped you, then hit that like button right now. What are you waiting for? Subscribe to our channel and join the ranks of those who seek out the hidden truths, the untold sagas that shaped our world. Tell us in the comments, was Bumpy's silent, systematic revenge justified, or did it cross a line? Let us know which side you're on. Share this video with someone who thinks they can outrun their past, and make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss the next chapter of forgotten history. Trust us, the next one is even more insane.